All right. So and I noticed even yesterday, in the last couple of days, I think you made a post on Saturday and a post on Sunday.
Yeah, I haven't done that in a while. I always send my blogs to Facebook, which is not a venue in social media where people tend to read longer articles. And I know that, but I get a few who read it. I have about 275 to 78 subscribers to a blog on depression and faith. And that's what I send there, and I send it to LinkedIn, and I'll get a few replies sometimes from former students who may not have subscribed or somebody.
Yeah.
But those were not my blogs. The last two are something I want to do more, and just little thoughts. It helps me to write down a devotional thought or whatever ministers to me. And it's the last 2 days, almost a new thing. I've mentioned a couple of verses or truth that ministered to me. Yes.
Yeah. I think everybody has a deep appreciation for the content that you write and the content that you have given in different church and classroom contexts. Um, you and I have talked. I don't know if you remember. We've talked a couple of times about the. It's a piece that I think Nathan Hatch wrote about his dad, about Buck Hatch, whom you and I both know, 1996-ish, something like that.
He wrote in 1994 CT, Christianity Today.
Yeah.
It was called The Blessing of Brokenness. And the reason it's such a clear memory, I quoted a little bit about him in that article in my Serve Strong book that came out from People in Ministry in 2014. And I blogged on it, and I edited that just a few weeks ago to go into a book I hope to do, and I hope to be finished with the content within a month or two. It would be a book of stories, poems, original poems, and devotional thoughts, sort of interspersed in a very personal type book. My goal, which they haven't approved yet, and because I haven't given them the material, is to, I'd like to give it to school, as long as they would pay to have the book design laid out, cover and all. I don't want a penny from it. I would just like it to be used, and I could get some copies at their cost. But I don't know what I titled it or anything. There's a section on depression, poems that are hard-hitting but give hope. There's a section on depression and faith. There's sections on relationship. It's all biblical, and it's all mostly personal, but I do have stories of Buck Hatch and other people. So there would be like 20 or 30 devotionals with poems. Those devotionals would be a page or two, and then there would be just 10 or 12 stories that are more of an extended illustration of a biblical truth.
When you get ready, I'll help. I'll design the cover for you if you would like. I'll just do that to help you.
Do you know Kelly Smith?
I don't know her.
Kelly, he's in computer
him,
work
I'm
locally.
sorry.
I can't remember where he worked. There's some older books the alumni have that had new covers over the last 10 years. Robert C., the original president, Buck Hatch, and he did that for them. And he did my discussion book with a new cover and got the ISBN numbers. I had to, but for 2 discussion books published, and I put them together in something in 2015 or 16. And I paid him a little over $1,000 to design it, do a little artwork or little things that were free inside to make it user friendly, and he did a good job with it. So if he had enough time, I'd like to use him again. But
yeah,
anyway.
Okay. And if he does, that'll be great. And if he doesn't, and you want any help, I'll help you. But there won't be any cost to it, so it'll just be.
So you do the book layout and design.
I have, but let's defer to him.
Use you.
Okay.
I would use you. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd be more than delighted to help. So, what? I don't know if let's call it key. Well, let me ask you a precursor question. If you had to look, I know it's speculative, but let's look at the stretch of a 365-day year. How much, let's call it productivity time, in interpersonal relationships, in prepping for stuff, whatever, how much time do you personally lose to depression? What's your estimate?
That's an intelligent question. I've always thought people show their good thinking, not just by what they say, but what they ask. That's why I always encourage questions in the classroom. There is one sense in which depression, even when there's not the physical component of the lack of sleep that I've mentioned, which that can either be a contributing factor to depression or it's often a symptom of depression. But apart from the physical things that give you a smaller window of productivity, it probably does impact. I've never tried to quantify that. But for example, in a blog, I have several blogs on this, I may come in my retirement in the last 2-3 years and have a desire to write a blog or a desire to work on this long-term book project, or I may have been teaching one course, one day a week at the prison, for example. So there are things to do, but I am demotivated. I know cognitively I have important things to do, and I'm grateful for it. But in my spirit, I'm numb, I'm lethargic, and I will often lie down on the couch and close my eyes first thing, even if it weren't a sleep issue. But so it probably costs me an hour or two on a full work day in terms of real productive time and energy. But the converse of that is that since a lot of my speaking now and writing, and in more recent years, starting in about over a decade ago, I started speaking more about my depression, very raw, transparent. When we had a suicide year, unfortunate, the last week of the 2014 school year, a guy I'd had in a large class, and he had 2 brothers here at the time. And they asked, and then they had another attempt, totally unsuccessful, at the start of September, right after school started. They shuttled the regular chapels, got the whole undergrad together, I can't remember if it included seminary, and asked me to give my testimony. And so that's on my website. It's a 30-minute testimony on what I've seen in the dark. They wanted somebody at a school like this they could identify with, so they would realize it's okay to talk about it. And then the second chapel, Steve Farah and then Carrie Caudle from psychology dealt with some issues about, is it okay to go to somebody if they think a friend is suicidal, that type of thing. But they wanted my story first, which I got a lot of nice responses to it. I said converse. It may take some time out of some days, and I don't want to go into great detail here. It's all in my writing. But when I lay here, scripture on attributes of God or promises flood my mind without even looking it up. Really? And I didn't memorize that. Some of it may have been because I teach Bible a lot, but a lot of it was out of desperation. It's for my soul. It's for my food. I would lie here sometimes a long time, but eventually God's promise would pop through. And I would literally review those verses. So I would be able to get up. I said, Lord, if I do anything of worth today in terms of productivity, you're going to have to help me. Because right now I don't want to live, much less write. So many days like that. So, but what makes that more limited time, I hope, special to some, would be the fact that I hurt. I know not everybody agrees with it, but I have several hundred letters or notes from either speaking or writing about depression, from my blog and otherwise, article in Discipleship Journal in 2003 or 4, right in the middle of my worst ever depression episode that lasted almost 2 years. So it wasn't on how to get rid of it. How does faith sustain when it doesn't go away? And so I started talking. If I did not have the capacity to understand what it's like to be in major depression and feel on one of two extremes. One extreme is robotic, numb. I can't feel a thing. No joy, happiness, but nothing. I can't even cry. The other extreme is life hurts. I'm hypersensitive and I cry at the least provocation and my heart literally breaks. And I can't tell you why sometimes. So I don't know which is worse. But if I didn't, people tell me, you can put into words what I experience that I can't tell somebody about, or somebody in their family, that I help them understand it and give not how to get over it, but how does faith sustain. That's why I named my blog penetratingthedarkness.com. There still may be dark clouds on the scenario a lot, but there's rays getting into it. There's rays of light through the promises that I don't always experience now, but I trust them most of the time. I'm just saying that that pain enhances the quality, I hope, and the nature of what I do, so it makes up for the time lost because I'm very authentic. And there were times, I'm sure, in my classes in the early years, long before I wrote and spoke as much about depression, when I would be passionate about something and I'd weep in class. If I'm passionate about truth that's impacted me, I'll never apologize for it. I don't do it all the time or most of the time, but when I preach as a pulpit supply or something, I have occasionally wept because the truth has touched me. If I weep or get emotional because the truth has touched me, I will never apologize for that. But there's probably a few times that I wept and it really showed instability and I needed counseling. I didn't get counseling until 1989 because I kept thinking the depression was my fault. It's a spiritual issue. And I finally read some things in Psychology Today and a pastor counseled with me over it. And I started to try medications and things. Mm-hmm. That helped for a while, not long term, but it helped for a while. I am rambling, I know.
No, you're not.
Prepared.
No, we're just chit-chat.
But the point is, I've seen it in another person that I thought was broken. He had a gun up his mouth before, and so forth. This is a guy who's still local and who is on a church staff now and remarried in a second marriage over a decade ago. But this guy has come close to suicide. He's one of our graduates from way back. I won't give his name. But when he taught with such passion in Sunday school at our church for a while. And he had broken relationships. He had a bad background in his family. But it was that pain that made him share the gospel with such passion. And when he taught a truth, even when he didn't give any testimony, it was part of him. And so, now it wasn't always when I wept. There was Andy Moll, who's one of our graduates in seminary. Diane's still an executive here now, and head of alumni and more. And he was an elder in the church. And I was on a preaching rotation when I was on the Christian Ed staff part-time at Cornerstone while I was full-time here. This was probably over a decade ago. Sure it was. And sometimes when I preached, I'd get intense. I don't mean screaming, but emotional. Not always weeping, but just intense. And Andy said, and I have a lot of respect for Andy because he's just a very different temperament from me. He said, how can you, he wasn't criticizing, he just said, how can you be that passionate all the time? And that energetic about what you're teaching? And I didn't know how to answer. I told my wife, Dolly, 51 years this June, I told him about that. I told her what he said, and she said, I tell you exactly why he doesn't understand it. Now, she wasn't being critical of him. She said, he hasn't hurt like you have. He doesn't have that. He hasn't been depressed like you. He hasn't had to cling to these truths. I'm not saying he hasn't had any adversity. This is nothing negative about him. She's just saying that. She said the passion is, she said, you have hurt, you have been helped, and you have more to give. So any time I have lost because of depression has been made up by the fact that maybe I teach with more intensity and with more passion. Probably more in the second half of my life here than the first. Because this is no false humility. I am a lot like Buck Hatch. I'm a broken man. I probably have the freedom more than he did to talk about it publicly. But, because I don't remember him doing a lot of testimony about his depression, he just went through it. And he wasn't real people oriented, but he was a godly teacher of people, changed people's lives. But see, so the brokenness can expand the blessing. So anytime I've lost, which sometimes could be at least an hour a day, due to depression alone, starting in my early years, it's probably made up for the fact that it forces me to cling to God. It forces me to get into Scripture just for my own soul because I am so weak and needy. I need replenishing. And I like to tell people, and I mean it, that I don't memorize Scripture because I'm spiritual, but because I'm not. I'm a sinner. I have indwelling sin. John Owen, even the believer has indwelling sin. Greatest Puritan devotional writer. And but I'm needy. And if I tell people who most appreciate the transparency when I write or speak, because they don't, especially with men, they don't see a man want to get that raw and authentic, or they're not used to it. I'll say, I don't mind if you see me as weak, as long as through my sharing you see my Savior as strong. That's the difference. If I just tell you I'm depressed and you come to me and I don't counsel people long term, but because you heard me mention it and I'm depressed, and I just say, yeah, let's cry together, and I give them all my symptoms and so they don't feel alone, that's not helping much. But if I say, I can't tell you how to totally overcome it because I haven't, but I can tell you what sustains me. I'm in the same boat, but by God's grace I have a paddle to get us out of this water. That doesn't, I don't know how I'll respond to the next big depressive episode, but every time I get down and I think of I want to live, and it's worse as you age, ironically. Whether that depression affects a relationship with one of my grown sons as it does, or whether it is the older I get, the less time I have to change, the less time I have to see a relationship redeemed and brought back the way it should be. So the depression can intensify. The largest, I forget the exact age, but the largest segment for suicide is not adolescents, even though that's growing. The largest segment is senior citizens, especially the second half. Their bodies are declining, they don't want to go through the pain, and they don't see any hope. You have less hope for the bright future. And so, anyway, I am rambling, I'm sorry.
No, you're not. All right, let me, I don't know exactly how it's going to fall out of my lips, but I'm probably going to frame maybe 3 questions, and you can just jumble up the responses in whatever way.
They'll be jumbled, all right, without preparation.
Well, I mean, you may even forget one of the questions, but, and I have in my mind maybe like these couple or 3 things swimming, but let me frame it on this. When Buck and I used to talk, I don't know if you know this about him, but you probably do. It's intriguing that he told me one time, he said, Ronnie, he said 1 year, and you just mentioned you had a 2-year, in essence, pretty deep depression. He told me that in 1 year, he was so depressed that all he could do was pick up his Bible and read the Psalms. He would read the Psalms, and I'm not asking the question yet, but I'm going to ask you what you do in a minute, but what his medicine was reading the Psalms, because of that back and forth thing that you see sometimes, where like a guy like Asaph will say, man, everything's messed up, and then all of a sudden he'll kind of grab himself by the lapels of his collar and reason with himself and steer himself back. And in fact, I don't know if you ever saw, if you looked on his shelf, you would see more than one of his Bibles, and the oil from our fingers where the Psalms are, it would be discolored on the outside of his Bible, on the top, the bottom, and the side, where he would have handled those pages. Oh man, what a person. I mean,
That's a great legacy to have. Now, I'm not saying when I said he didn't talk about it much. I'm sure he did one-to-one. I just never heard him say it publicly, so I'm sure he was transparent. I do understand.
I'll frame one of the questions. What does Dolly do and how does she help you?
I'll be glad to leave you a hard copy or tell you how to find the blog on that topic. I had, about 2 or 3 years ago, I wrote an article. It was later published in a ladies' magazine, Just Between Us, that Jill Briscoe founded. And it was on how a spouse can help with depression, and I used her as an example. My wife is a level, phlegmatic, she's more people-oriented, she is sanguine, but she has never been depressed. And she can't experientially understand, but she has never once implied, much less stated or questioned my faith or my maturity. She just understands it's part of me. So there's no belittling at all. There are times when I know she's praying for me. She doesn't do this most of the time, but she will occasionally text me and say, knowing I'm been depressed more than normal that week, I prayed for you today, babe, while I'm here. Or when I weep at home, she will often just come and put her arm around me without saying anything. Because she knows that any input she gives me that cognitively, I know it. I just can't experience it yet right then. The main one thing, and I give this illustration in that article, it is sometimes depression can increase vulnerability to sin, especially if it's mixed with insomnia. Yeah. And you tend to be irritable. That's in the research. Irritability and lack of sleep apart from depression increases. Well, sometimes when things are really hard for me emotionally, I don't know if down south you've heard this word, I'm short. And I like to say, you're mighty short to be so tall, Powell. So I'm a little edgy or irritable in my tone of voice. I don't mean screaming. I've never cursed at anybody or anything. But she has looked at me when I'm edgy with her, or I say something with a little bit too sharp a tone, like supper didn't come when I wanted it. Little things that go through my head anyway. And she'll look at me. I still remember the day several years ago in the kitchen, I said something a little too harshly. She turned around and she said, look, I'm very sorry you're having a rough week with your depression, but you don't talk to me that way. I don't deserve to be spoken to that way. So she does it. Ephesians 4:26-27. One of the most practical things for friendships or work relationships or marriage, don't let the sun go down on your anger. My phrase is, if you're seeing red, don't go to bed. And we discussed that early in our marriage. And so she will not let that settle. She said she confronts. But she did it nicely. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't scream back. And I didn't scream, I just got a little edgy, and it was insensitive. And then that compels me to apologize, which she readily accepts. So she confronts when the vulnerability to sin makes me sin in terms of tone of voice or whatnot. So she's very good at that. But her prayer for me, which doesn't always come together when we're together, but her prayer for me and her text of encouragement and her confronting me if I cross the line, even though she knows that I'm more vulnerable then, but she won't allow certain things, which is healthy for the relationship.
You mentioned that when you'll lie, like right here in your office on the sofa, you said, I think you said, I may not have it verbatim, but you said something like different scriptures come flooding in. What, I don't know if you can parse this, it may be daunting to parse, but what percentage of it is passive and what percentage of you is leaning in and engaging and saying, I've got to get certain truths, that I've got to pour these things into my mind and heart? Does that make sense what I just asked?
It is hard to give a percentage. Sometimes I will intentionally, all right, what have I written about in my post on depression? I use a concept borrowed from John Piper, preaching to yourself. His book, Future Grace, to me is the best Piper book, and I've read almost all of them. And he has a chapter in there, Future Grace versus Despondency. And he quotes Virgin and others on depression in there. But he borrowed from a classic book from the mid-60s by Martin Lloyd-Jones on spiritual depression. And Jones said, we often talk to ourselves, but we don't answer ourselves. We don't talk back to ourselves. The negative self